The church fell silent. 200 guests stood watching as 31-year-old Savannah Brooks walked slowly down the aisle toward the man she loved. Her white wedding gown shimmered beneath the lights of St. Matthew's Church. At the altar, her fiancé Ryan Mercer smiled through nervous tears. Everything was perfect, until a voice shattered the moment. "Stop the wedding." The words echoed through the church. Confused guests turned around. Savannah froze. Her father stopped walking. Ryan looked away from the altar, and standing in the middle of the aisle was Savannah's older brother, Mason Brooks. His face was pale. His hands trembled, and what he said next would destroy two families. Before this wedding continues, everyone deserves to know the truth. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the crowd. People assumed it was a joke, a wedding prank, an emotional speech, but Mason wasn't smiling. He looked directly at his sister. Then he spoke 6 words that changed everything. Tyler Harris was completely innocent. The church fell into stunned silence. Savannah's face drained of color. Her breathing stopped, and for the first time in 23 years, the secret she thought would stay buried forever began to surface. A lie told to protect a family. A lie that destroyed an innocent boy's future. A lie Savannah had spent years trying to forget. What nobody inside that church knew was that this story hadn't started that morning. It had started 23 years earlier, with a frightened little girl, panicked mother, and a decision that would ruin countless lives. In 2003, Cedar Ridge, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Children rode bicycles until sunset. Neighbors left their doors unlocked. Families gathered for summer block parties. And nobody imagined their quiet community was about to become the center of a tragedy. The Brooks family lived on Maple Street. David Brooks owned a small construction company. His wife, Linda, worked at a local elementary school. Together they were raising 2 children, 13-year-old Mason and 8-year-old Savannah. Across the street lived the Harris family. Daniel and Karen Harris were raising their only son, Tyler. Tyler and Mason had been best friends for years. They played baseball together, built tree houses, spent entire summers outdoors. Most people assumed they would remain friends forever. Then came the annual neighborhood block party. It was supposed to be a celebration. Families filled the streets. Children played games. Music drifted through the neighborhood. Everyone was having a good time. Then Savannah disappeared. Nobody noticed at first. Children often wandered between houses during community events. But when nearly 20 minutes passed, concern began spreading. Neighbors started searching. Family members called her name. Then Savannah finally returned home. She was crying, terrified, and visibly shaken. Linda rushed toward her daughter. What happened? Savannah struggled to speak. She was frightened, confused, still trying to process what had happened. Then she whispered a name. Franklin. Linda froze, because Franklin Brooks wasn't a stranger. He was family. David's younger brother. Savannah's uncle. For months, Linda had carried private concerns about him. Nothing she could prove. Nothing she could report. Just small incidents. Strange comments. Moments that made her uncomfortable. Moments she desperately wanted to dismiss. But hearing his name from her daughter shattered any sense of safety she still had. That night, after Savannah had calmed down, Linda sat with her in the kitchen, away from everyone else, away from David, away from Mason. Savannah tried explaining what happened, but like many frightened children, her memories were scattered and incomplete. She couldn't explain everything clearly. She only knew she had been scared. Linda listened, and panic took over. Because accusing Franklin would destroy the Brooks family. It would create a scandal. It would tear relatives apart. It would expose secrets nobody wanted exposed. And somewhere inside that fear, Linda made the worst decision of her life. Instead of helping investigators find the truth, she began steering Savannah toward a different story. A story involving someone else. Someone easier to blame. Someone outside the family. Tyler Harris. At first, Savannah resisted, because Tyler hadn't done anything to her. but she was 8 years old. And Linda was her mother, the person she trusted more than anyone in the world. Over the following days, Linda repeated questions, repeated suggestions, repeated assumptions. Slowly, Savannah began repeating them too. Then the story became official. And once it did, there was no turning back. Within days, Tyler Harris became the target of an investigation. His parents insisted he was innocent. Tyler insisted he was innocent. Mason refused to believe his best friend could do something so terrible. But nobody listened, because fear is powerful. And when fear combines with outrage, facts often disappear. As the investigation grew, the Harris family became outcasts. Neighbors stopped speaking to them. Friends disappeared. Rumors spread. Tyler watched his entire world collapse before he was old enough to understand why. And while the town believed justice was being served, a devastating lie had already taken root. A lie that would survive for more than 2 decades. A lie that would eventually bring everyone back to a wedding day nobody would ever forget. For years, the secret remained hidden, at least on the surface. The town moved on. People stopped talking about Tyler Harris. The headlines disappeared. The gossip faded. And eventually, Cedar Ridge convinced itself that the past belonged in the past. But not everyone moved on. Tyler Harris couldn't. Every opportunity that should have shaped his future vanished. Friends disappeared. Doors closed. People looked at him differently. Even after the investigation ended, the label attached to his name never truly went away. Meanwhile, life continued for the Brooks family. Mason graduated high school and left for college. Savannah grew into a bright, compassionate young woman. To anyone who met her, she seemed kind-hearted, the type of person who genuinely cared about others, which made the secret she carried even harder to understand. As Savannah got older, pieces of that night slowly returned to her. Not all at once. Little fragments. Memories she had buried as a child. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table with her mother. She remembered being confused. She remembered repeating things she wasn't completely sure about. And eventually, she remembered something else. The first name she had spoken. Franklin. Not Tyler. Franklin. The realization haunted her. At first, she tried convincing herself she was mistaken. Maybe she was remembering it wrong. Maybe childhood memories couldn't be trusted. Maybe she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew the truth. Years later, Linda finally confirmed it. The conversation happened during Savannah's second year of college. A conversation neither woman would ever forget. Linda cried as she confessed what she had done. She admitted that she had redirected suspicion away from Franklin. She admitted that she had influenced a frightened little girl. She admitted that Tyler Harris had likely been innocent all along. Savannah was devastated. For days, she barely left her dorm room. Everything she believed about her childhood suddenly changed. The worst part wasn't learning the truth. The worst part was realizing she had helped spread the lie. Even if she had only been a child. Even if she had never intended harm. Her words had consequences. And those consequences had destroyed someone's life. For months, she considered coming forward. Then fear took over. The same fear that had controlled her mother. Fear of destroying her family. Fear of exposing the truth. Fear of facing what people would think. So she remained silent. And every year that passed made speaking up feel even harder. Then she met Ryan Mercer. Ryan wasn't wealthy. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of man who needed attention. He was steady, dependable, the kind of person who showed up when people needed him, the kind of person who made people feel safe. For the first time in years, Savannah felt genuinely happy. Their relationship grew naturally. No drama, no games, no chaos. Within 2 years, they were engaged. Friends described them as perfect together. Even Mason approved. To everyone around them, it looked like Savannah had built the life she always wanted. A successful career, a loving relationship, a bright future. But beneath that future was a secret she carried every day. And secrets have a way of demanding attention when you least expect it. One Tuesday evening, less than a year before the wedding, Savannah received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she answered. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, she sat motionless at her kitchen table. Her face had gone pale. Her hands trembled. When Ryan arrived home, he immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Savannah forced a smile. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The caller had been an investigator, and he had asked a question Savannah never expected to hear again. Can we talk about Tyler Harris? The name hit her like a punch to the chest. 23 years disappeared instantly. The investigator explained that new information had surfaced during a review of several old cases. Witnesses had come forward. Evidence previously overlooked was being examined. Questions were being raised. Serious questions. The case involving Tyler Harris had been reopened, and investigators wanted to speak with Savannah. After hanging up, she barely slept. The next morning, she made a decision. She wouldn't tell anyone. Not Ryan. Not Mason. Not even her father. Because she knew exactly where the investigation would lead. To the truth. Weeks passed. Then months. Savannah ignored calls. Ignored emails. Ignored requests for interviews. She convinced herself the investigation would eventually go away. But it didn't. Instead, things got worse. One afternoon, a letter arrived in her mailbox. There was no return address. No explanation. Only a single photograph. The picture showed a man standing outside a prison. Older. Thinner. Exhausted. Gray beginning to appear in his hair. But Savannah recognized him immediately. Tyler Harris. Slowly, she turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 6 words. I lost 22 years because of this. Savannah felt her knees weaken. Because Tyler hadn't simply lost his reputation. The accusation had followed him everywhere. Every mistake was viewed differently. Every opportunity became harder to reach. And years later, when he became the target of another investigation, his damaged reputation made him an easy person to suspect. An easy person to convict. 22 years of his life disappeared behind prison walls. Whether directly or indirectly, the lie had helped put him there. And Savannah knew it. For days, she carried the photograph with her. She couldn't stop looking at it. Couldn't stop imagining everything Tyler had lost. Then came another phone call. This time, it wasn't an investigator. It was Tyler. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Tyler broke the silence. I don't want revenge. Savannah closed her eyes. Her hands shook. I just want the truth. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Because after all these years, he wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for punishment. He wasn't asking for revenge. He was asking for honesty. Then Tyler said something that made her heart stop. I know you were a child. Savannah couldn't speak. I know somebody put those words in your mouth. The tears came harder. And then Tyler asked a question that changed everything. Does your brother know? The line went silent. Because Savannah already knew the answer. No, Mason didn't know. Not yet. But if Tyler had uncovered this much, it was only a matter of time before the truth reached him too. And when it did, the secret that had survived 23 years would finally begin to collapse. 3 months before the wedding, Mason Brooks received a package with no return address. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Small, plain, ordinary. Inside was a single flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. For several days, Mason ignored it. He assumed it was a mistake. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. One evening after work, he plugged the drive into his laptop. Within minutes, his world began to unravel. The drive contained hundreds of files. Police reports, witness statements, investigator notes, court documents, records connected to one case, the Tyler Harris case. At first, Mason thought someone was playing a cruel prank. But the more he read, the more uncomfortable he became. Small inconsistencies appeared everywhere. Witness statements that didn't match. Timelines that changed. Important details that seemed to shift depending on who was speaking. Questions nobody had ever answered. Then he found an audio file. The label simply read, "Interview Linda Brooks, 2003. Mason clicked play. The recording captured investigators questioning his mother shortly after the original accusation. For nearly an hour, nothing seemed unusual. Then, near the end of the interview, a detective stepped out of the room. Apparently, nobody realized the recorder was still running. For a few seconds there was silence. Then Linda spoke. The words were faint, but clear enough. "She has to stick to the story." Mason froze. His stomach tightened. He replayed the sentence. Again, and again, and again. "She has to stick to the story." At first, he searched for another explanation. Maybe there was context missing. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe he was misunderstanding. But the more evidence he reviewed, the harder that became. For the first time in 23 years, Mason considered something he never thought possible. What if Tyler Harris had been telling the truth all along? The thought terrified him. Because if Tyler was innocent, someone else wasn't. A week later, Mason received a phone call. The caller introduced himself as Tyler Harris. For several seconds, neither man spoke. 23 years had passed since they last talked. 23 years since their friendship had been destroyed. Finally, Tyler broke the silence. "You listened to the recording." It wasn't a question. Mason swallowed. "Yeah." Another pause. Then Tyler said something unexpected. "I don't blame you." The words hit Mason harder than anger ever could. Because Tyler had every reason to hate him. Yet somehow he didn't. A few days later, the two men agreed to meet. The meeting took place at a quiet diner outside Columbus, Ohio. When Tyler walked through the door, Mason barely recognized him. Not because of age. Because of what life had done to him. There was a heaviness in his eyes. The kind that comes from spending years defending yourself against something you didn't do. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Tyler extended his hand. The same hand that had once helped Mason build treehouses, throw baseballs, win little league games. Slowly, Mason shook it. "I'm sorry," he said. Tyler nodded. "I know." For nearly 3 hours, they talked. Tyler explained what investigators had discovered. A retired detective reviewing old files had found serious problems in the original case. Missing reports, ignored witnesses, evidence that never received proper attention. Most importantly, a witness had recently come forward. Someone who remembered seeing Savannah shortly before she returned home crying. According to the witness, Savannah had not been with Tyler. She had been seen with another adult. An adult whose name never appeared in the official investigation. When Tyler finally revealed the name, Mason felt sick. Franklin Brooks, his uncle, his father's younger brother. For several moments, Mason couldn't speak. The words felt impossible. Franklin had attended birthdays, family reunions, Christmas dinners. He had been part of their lives for years. Tyler continued. Investigators believed Linda Brooks had privately worried about Franklin long before the block party. There had been rumors, concerns, moments that made her uncomfortable. Nothing proven, nothing official, but enough to frighten a mother. Enough to panic when Savannah came home upset and mentioned Franklin's name. Enough to make a terrible decision. When Mason left the diner that evening, he drove for nearly an hour before realizing he had no memory of the road. His mind was somewhere else, trying to understand how everything he believed could be wrong, trying to understand how one lie could survive for so long. By the time he arrived home, he knew there was only one person who might have answers. His father. The conversation lasted almost 4 hours. At first, David Brooks denied everything. Then he stopped denying. Then he started crying. Slowly, the truth emerged. Years earlier, Linda had become concerned about Franklin. She never had proof, but she had suspicions. Strong suspicions. When Savannah came home frightened from the block party and mentioned Franklin's name, Linda panicked. Instead of following the truth wherever it led, she tried protecting the family. She redirected suspicion, away from Franklin, toward Tyler, an innocent 13-year-old boy. David lowered his head. "I thought she was protecting us." Mason stared at him. protecting us. The words made him furious, because protecting one family had destroyed another. But there was one question he still needed answered. One question he was almost afraid to ask. Did Savannah know? David didn't answer immediately. He looked away. And in that moment Mason already knew. The answer was yes. Not when she was 8. Not when it happened. But later. Years later. Linda eventually told her everything. Savannah learned the truth. She learned Tyler was innocent. She learned what her mother had done. And she remained silent. Mason felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Because this wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about betrayal. His sister had known. For years. And she had never told him. A week later, Mason drove to Savannah's house unannounced. Ryan was away. The moment Savannah opened the door and saw his face, she knew. She knew the secret had finally reached him. Neither of them spoke at first. They sat across from each other in silence. Then Mason asked the question, "How long have you known?" Savannah's eyes filled with tears immediately. She didn't deny it, didn't pretend, didn't ask what he meant. And that told Mason everything. "How long?" "Years," she whispered. The answer hit him like a punch. "Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. You knew Tyler was innocent?" Savannah nodded. "You knew Mom manipulated everything?" Another nod. "And you said nothing?" Tears rolled down her face. "I was scared." Mason laughed bitterly. So was Tyler. The room fell silent. Savannah looked away, because she knew he was right. For years she had carried guilt. But guilt wasn't the same as action. And Tyler had paid the price for everyone's silence. Finally, Savannah whispered something she had never told anyone. "I was planning to tell the truth." Mason stared at her. "When?" She hesitated, then answered quietly. "After the wedding." The words landed badly. Very badly. To Savannah, it sounded reasonable. To Mason, it sounded like another delay. Another excuse. Another promise for someday. 23 years of someday. And as he walked out of the house that afternoon, something inside him changed. Not hatred. Not revenge. Something more dangerous. The belief that if Savannah wasn't willing to tell the truth now, then maybe he would do it for her, no matter who it destroyed. October 11th arrived bright and clear. The kind of autumn day people describe as perfect. Golden leaves covered the streets of Cedar Ridge. The sky was blue. The air was cool. And inside St. Matthew's Church, 200 guests gathered to celebrate the wedding of Savannah Brooks and Ryan Mercer. Photographers moved through the crowd. Family members greeted old friends. Laughter filled the sanctuary. Everything looked exactly as it should. But beneath the smiles and excitement, a storm was already forming. Savannah had barely slept the night before. For months, she had been carrying a secret that felt heavier with every passing day. She knew she couldn't keep living this way. The wedding would be the last time she delayed the truth. After the honeymoon, she planned to meet investigators. She planned to tell them everything. About Franklin. About her mother. About Tyler. About the lie. For the first time in years, she felt ready. What she didn't know was that someone else had already made a decision of his own. Mason arrived at the church shortly before the ceremony. Several relatives noticed something seemed different. He was unusually quiet, distracted, lost in thought. When people spoke to him, he barely responded. His eyes rarely left his sister, as if he were carrying a burden nobody else could see. At exactly 2 p.m., the ceremony began. The music started. Guests stood. Ryan took his place at the altar. His smile stretched from ear to ear. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Then the church doors opened. Savannah appeared. A collective sigh moved through the crowd. She looked beautiful. Her white gown shimmered beneath the lights. Her father took her arm. Together they began walking toward the altar. Toward Ryan. Toward the future they had spent years planning. Step by step, Savannah moved down the aisle. Halfway there, a voice interrupted the music. "Stop." The word echoed through the church. At first, nobody reacted. Several guests looked around in confusion. The musicians stopped playing. Savannah froze. Ryan frowned. Then Mason stepped into the aisle. The room immediately fell silent. David Brooks looked horrified. "Son, what are you doing?" Mason didn't answer. His eyes never left Savannah. For several long seconds, neither sibling spoke. Then Mason turned toward the guests and said something nobody expected. "Before this wedding continues, everyone deserves to know the truth." A nervous laugh came from somewhere in the back. People still thought it might be a joke, a surprise speech, a wedding prank. But Mason wasn't smiling, not even close. His voice trembled as he spoke. 23 years ago, an innocent boy's life was destroyed. The church became completely silent. Savannah's face turned pale. She already knew where this was going. "Mason," she whispered, but he continued. His name was Tyler Harris. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Others recognized the name immediately. The older members of the community remembered. The scandal, the investigation, the rumors, the family that disappeared. Ryan looked back and forth between Mason and Savannah, completely lost. "What is he talking about?" he asked. No one answered. Mason reached into his jacket. He removed a folder, the same folder that had consumed his life for months. Inside were copies of reports, witness statements, and Linda Brooks' letter. "My sister knows the truth." The words hit the church like a bomb. Ryan turned toward Savannah. "What truth?" Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Savannah?" Still she said nothing, because for the first time in 23 years, there was nowhere left to hide. Mason's voice cracked. The accusation against Tyler Harris was false. Gasps spread throughout the church. Several guests covered their mouths. Others stared in disbelief. Ryan looked as though he had been punched. "What?" Mason held up the documents. "My mother knew it." He looked toward his father. "Eventually, my father knew it." Then he looked directly at Savannah. And she knew it too. The room erupted into whispers. People turned toward one another, trying to process what they had just heard. Ryan stepped away from the altar. His face was filled with confusion, fear, disbelief. He looked at Savannah and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Is it true?" The church fell silent again. Every eye in the room focused on her. For years, Savannah had imagined this moment. Imagined standing before people and finally telling the truth. She just never imagined it would happen here. Not in her wedding dress. Not in front of 200 guests. Not like this. Tears rolled down her face. Slowly, she nodded. The reaction was immediate. Shock swept through the church. Someone gasped loudly. A woman began crying. Several guests simply stared, unable to believe what they were hearing. Ryan looked devastated. "Tell me he's wrong." Savannah couldn't. "Tell me this isn't true." She couldn't, because for the first time in her life, she was done lying. With trembling hands, she stepped forward. Then she spoke. "When I was 8 years old, I came home scared." The church remained silent. "I mentioned my Uncle Franklin." A murmur spread through the crowd. "My mother panicked." Savannah struggled to continue. She was afraid of what would happen if our family became involved. More tears fell. Over time, the story changed. Ryan stared at her, heartbroken, and Tyler Harris paid the price. The room felt frozen. Savannah looked toward the guests, then toward Mason, then toward Ryan. "I should have told the truth years ago." Her voice broke completely. "I was a child when it started." She paused. "But I wasn't a child when I learned the truth." Silence. I knew. The confession hung in the air. Heavy, painful, final, and I was too afraid to speak. Several guests lowered their heads. Others looked away, because everyone could see what this confession had cost her. Ryan stood motionless. The woman he loved had just admitted to carrying a devastating secret throughout their entire relationship. Not because she was evil. Not because she enjoyed the lie. Because fear had controlled her. The same fear that controlled her mother. But fear didn't change the damage. Nothing could. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then a voice came from the back of the church. A voice few people recognized. But Mason did. Savannah did. Tyler Harris slowly stood from the last row. The church turned toward him. No one had realized he was there. He looked older than his years. Life had left its mark. But there he was. The man whose future had been stolen. The man whose name had lived inside the secret for 23 years. Tyler looked directly at Savannah. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Because the truth was finally standing between them. No longer hidden. No longer buried. No longer denied. And in that moment, everyone inside St. Matthew's Church understood something. This wedding wasn't ending because of a scandal. It was ending because the truth had finally arrived. And when the truth arrives after 23 years, nobody leaves unchanged. The wedding never resumed. No vows were exchanged. No rings were placed on fingers. No first dance was shared. Within an hour, most of the guests had quietly left the church. Some were shocked. Some were angry. Some simply didn't know what to think. But everyone understood they had witnessed something far bigger than a canceled wedding. They had witnessed the collapse of a secret that had survived for 23 years. Outside the church, reporters quickly began arriving. Word spread through Cedar Ridge faster than anyone imagined. By the following morning, the story was everywhere. For the first time, investigators publicly confirmed they were reopening every aspect of the original case involving Tyler Harris. What followed was a months-long review of evidence, witness statements, and newly discovered documents. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the truth became. Critical details had been ignored. Important leads had never been followed. Witnesses had been overlooked. And most significantly, there was no credible evidence linking Tyler Harris to the accusation that had destroyed his reputation. Instead, the investigation revealed a tragic chain of events fueled by fear, assumptions, and manipulation. A frightened child, panicked mother, a lie repeated until it became accepted as fact. Nearly a year after Savannah's wedding was stopped, the state officially cleared Tyler Harris of all remaining allegations connected to the original case. His name was finally restored. The public apology made headlines. But Tyler's reaction was surprisingly quiet. When reporters asked how he felt, he gave a simple answer. Being told you're innocent doesn't give you back 22 years. The statement spread across the country because everyone knew he was right. Justice had arrived, but it had arrived far too late. Some things can be repaired. Time isn't one of them. As for Savannah Brooks, her life changed forever. In the weeks following the wedding, she fully cooperated with investigators. For the first time, she told the complete truth. Every detail, every memory, every conversation. Nothing hidden, nothing protected, nothing avoided. Many people condemned her. Others showed sympathy. Because while Savannah had remained silent for years, she had also been a frightened child manipulated by the person she trusted most. The public remained divided. But Savannah herself never tried to escape responsibility. She accepted the consequences. She understood that good intentions could not erase years of silence. And she understood something else. The truth she feared would destroy her life had already been destroying it for years. Ryan Mercer struggled the most. The woman he planned to marry was not the person he thought he knew. Not because she was malicious, but because she had built their relationship on an omission so large it eventually swallowed everything. For months, Ryan and Savannah barely spoke. Eventually, they met one final time. No cameras, no reporters, no family. Just two people saying goodbye to the future they once imagined together. Neither blamed the other. Neither raised their voice. Some wounds don't end with anger. Sometimes they end with sadness. And sadness can be even harder to carry. The engagement ended quietly. Ryan moved away from Cedar Ridge. Friends said he became more reserved afterward. More careful about trust. More cautious about the stories people tell. David Brooks sold the family home less than a year later. The house had become a reminder of everything his family had lost. He spent the rest of his life trying to make peace with choices he never should have accepted. As for Mason, many people criticized the way he exposed the secret. Some believed he should have gone directly to investigators. Others believed Savannah deserved more time. But Mason never defended his actions. He simply said this: "For 23 years, everyone waited for the right moment to tell the truth. That moment never came. It was the last public statement he ever made." 3 years later, Tyler Harris returned to Cedar Ridge one final time. He drove through the neighborhood where he once played baseball, past the streets where he and Mason rode bicycles, past the homes where childhood memories had been created and destroyed. Before leaving town, he stopped outside St. Matthew's Church, the same church where the truth had finally come out. For several minutes, he stood there silently. Then he looked toward the building and shook his head. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just reflection. Because after everything he had lost, after everything everyone had lost, one lesson remained painfully clear. A lie may solve today's problem, but it creates tomorrow's disaster. And the longer it survives, the more people it destroys. Savannah spent years believing silence would protect her family. Linda Brooks believed the same thing. Both were wrong. The truth eventually arrived anyway. Only by then, the damage was far greater. Maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. The truth is often painful, sometimes terrifying, sometimes life-changing. But the cost of hiding it is almost always higher. Because secrets don't disappear. They wait. And eventually, they demand to be heard. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe to Ethos Stories for more powerful fictional crime dramas, family secrets, shocking betrayals, and emotional stories that reveal the consequences of the choices people make. And tell us in the comments, do you think Mason did the right thing by exposing the truth at the wedding, or should he have handled it differently? Your answer might not be as simple as it seems. Until next time, remember, every secret has a cost. The only question is who will eventually pay it.